Hello BookTube. I thought I'd make a video on the subject of is fiction more truthful than non-fiction? It seems illogical, of course. Obviously, fiction is made up, non-fiction is the truth. But I think I'm not the first to say that it doesn't always work like that. I think there was some literary critic who made this point that fiction is truer than non-fiction. And it does seem bizarre. Um, I mean, non-fiction consists of subjects like biography, autobiography, travel, history, um, and similar subjects. And we take them as factual, I suppose, or we hope that at least the author has taken the trouble to do his or her best to make that factual because it's non-fiction. We somehow want to have faith in that integrity. And as we know, um, knowledge is slippery, and especially with something like a memoir autobiography, that you have to omit things anyway, but also one as a writer will mostly tend to um, paint yourself in the best possible light. There are some exceptions. I think Jean-Jacques Rousseau's book, Confessions, some of the things he says about himself in there, he'd be in prison now. Um, he talks about exposing himself to women and things. And it's odd, really, that Rousseau had a high opinion of himself as well. But nevertheless, in that Confessions, which is, a classic and it's a very good read, but he just come out with some strange things that you wouldn't necessarily expect for somebody to come out with in a memoir like that. Um, and then history, of course, history is always up for debate. They say history is written by the victors, don't they? Um, so an account of the Battle of Waterloo tends to be written by Wellington and his allies rather than the French. Don't particularly want to remember it. But it's a slightly partial view. I think most accounts of Waterloo actually do try to respect Napoleon and the French army, and they can't avoid the fact that Wellington called it a close run thing. He had a reason for saying that. But anyway, history. And near where I live here, a, there's several battlefields around here, but one is called Towton, which Towton battle was fought in 1461, March the 29th. Supposedly the bloodiest battle ever fought on British soil. It's in the Wars of the Roses, between the Lancastrians and the Yorkists. It had nothing to do with Lancaster and York counties. It was the families. But anyway, a bloody battle was fought, and there's still debate about how was it really such a bloody battle. And even recently on Facebook, somebody was a historian, a man who's studied the subject, um, was claiming that wasn't even a battle at all, or if there was, it certainly wasn't. It was just a skirmish. It wasn't a big, you know, all holds barred, no holds barred battle of crushing defeat. There's a saying that there's a stream there called Cockbeck, and Cockbeck ran with blood, and he disputes all that. And he has some facts to back him up. He's done the research. And it's close by here. So I often cycle past that and think about it. They have found bodies and everything. There was a bath. And this is starting. Sometimes you can almost disprove theories yourself because I know this area maybe better than this historian does. He talks about it. It was fought in a snowstorm, and he says it wouldn't have been possible to manoeuvre huge armies in what was marshy, boggy conditions. But it isn't marshy, boggy conditions up there, and the landscape hasn't changed much. And it's on a plateau. It's high up. It's not boggy. It wouldn't have been a problem. Getting there might have been to get up onto the plateau, but the two armies faced each other on a plateau. Anyway, all these things become a little bit more slippery, don't they, when you get into it? And travel. I used to really love reading travel. Paul Through, um, his book about the train travel. Bruce Chatwin and Patrick Leigh Fermor, Norman Lewis. I mean, all great writers. But evidence has emerged that Bruce Chatwin made a lot of his travels up. He made the details up. He just messed about with it a lot. He he said something to the effect of lies that go to make lie. He says, "I don't mind lies that go to make one big truth." The trouble is, can lies go to make one big truth? I'm not sure about that. Anyway, I'm leading up to um, this particular book, a bestseller. This Rain Win, The Salt Path, which came out in 2018. A tale of triumph, of hope over despair, of love over everything. That's the Sunday Times. A beautiful, thoughtful, lyrical story of homelessness, human strength, and endurance. The Guardian. An astonishing narrative of two people dragging themselves from the depths of despair along some of the most dramatic landscapes in the country. That's The Independent. The most inspirational book of the year, The Times. A remarkable and redemptive journey, The Financial Times. So, it was a huge success, and they've made a film out of it with Gillian Anderson playing the part of Raina Wynn. A couple of years ago, and UK readers will know about this, but American um, viewers, if I have any, might not know this. An Observer journalist became suspicious. And I mean, I read the book when it came out. I enjoyed it, and I thought, I mean, it's easy with hindsight to say this, but I thought this is a bit too good to be true. The beginning of the story is that there's this couple, middle-aged couple, living in a nice cottage in Wales, and suddenly they're turfed out because their husband, who's called Moth, has lent a friend a sum of money to invest in a business. The business goes bust, and the creditors come because the friend has disappeared. So the creditors come to them, and they are turfed out. The All the money's taken from them. They're left with absolutely nothing. To top it all, Moth has a terminal disease. It's got a big, long, complicated name, and I can't remember what it is, but it's not cancer, it's something else. So they're destitute, penniless, and they've got this death sentence hanging over them. So, but anyway, they decide to walk the South Coast Path, which is a 630-mile walk round sort of the Cornwall and that area. Very difficult walk, actually, because it's ups and downs, as well as being very long. It's grueling because it's all up and down. So once they set off, and then Moth begins to recover with just the effort of walking and so on. and they have all kinds of adventures, uh, and it's got there's a feel good factor. People liked it. I mean, it's very popular, sold millions of copies, and but yeah, as I was about to say, a journalist from the Observer newspaper became suspicious and decided to try and look into it, and from the evidence went to interview people who've known the author. Now, it isn't the author's real name, so that made it a little bit more difficult. The author is really called Sally Walker, and the first place she went to was where the house had been repossessed, and it's a Welsh town. Can't remember the name of it, but one of the first people she interviewed about this was a woman that Sally Walker had worked for her husband, who was an estate agent, and had, in the process of several years working for them, had stolen £65,000 from them. The police were called in, and of course, she was charged. That's this Verena was charged with theft. Good chance of going to prison. So to avoid that, she borrowed money and paid back if to the estate agent family if they would drop the charges. And so, being kind-hearted people, they did. But then this debt moved over. She'd borrowed, Rainowin borrowed the money from somebody else, and that became, and then defaulted on that debt. And the other thing that emerged was that far from being homeless, they had a property in France, and they didn't mention that in the book, needless to say. And then medical practitioners then this journalist began to ask medical practitioners about this disease, and they said most unlikely, words to that effect. It doesn't work that way. It's not a disease you can work off by going for walks and so and so. And then she began to ask, did they do the walk? And even there, doubts began to emerge. They have done the walk apparently, but they didn't do it all at once. It's not like they set off from point A and ended up at point Z or Z. They did it in little bits and then went home. Not quite the same thing as what we get in here. So, of course, a lot of people were disappointed and disillusioned because people had got solace from this book. It's about human resilience. All these, tale of triumph over despair and love over everything. And when people felt um, uh, disappointed, there's a harder word for it than that. Betrayed. People felt betrayed. And Reno Win is disputing it, but it seems that, I don't know one way or the other. But let's say lots of doubts have arisen. So that's what I'm talking about in a way. This is non-fiction. It's marketed as non-fiction. How many non-fiction books are really truthful? Some are. Science books, but popular science, I enjoy popular science. But a good popular science book will tell you that this is not the truth. Science doesn't tell you the truth. Science tells you the latest theories, because science doesn't deal in truth. It's always open to challenge. That's the point of it. That's how it moves on. So even, Sir Isaac Newton, even Einstein so on. They proposed their theories, brilliant minds, but they all knew that it's provisional. It's not the truth with a capital T. So that's what I'm thinking about. And then I'm looking at certain novels which I think can give you more truth. Let's say Middlemarch, that topped the Guardian 100 best novels, and it's set in 1832. It's a pivotal time in English society, setting in the Midlands because that was the time of the Great Reform Act, which extended the franchise, not to everybody, but people with property, more people with property. And it made there were big social changes going on. And it's such a vast scope of a book that you feel you get a real true picture of English life, middle class life, in the middle of England, near Coventry at the time of the Industrial Revolution. Um, and also some beautiful psychological truth. The marriage between Dorothea and Casaubon. Dorothy is the heroine of the book. She's a young woman, 20 or something like that, and happens to meet this Edward Casaubon who comes to their family house, and he's a professor. He's an academic and intellectual. He was working on a great um, book or tome or project called The Key to All the Mythologies. And in spite of the vast age range, Dorothy is very impressed. Because she's a very earnest young woman. She wants to make it. She wants to do something of significance. So she feels she could help this man with this, and kind of opens herself up to him a little bit. And he proposes marriage, and she accepts. And it's obviously a huge mistake, but it's the kind of thing an idealist person might make. Somebody with not much life experience, and she makes this mistake, and it's got to me, a psychological truth about it. And it's the same with the other, a lot of it is about relationships. There's the doctor and his wife, and they have issues with various things, and the complexity of it, marvelous. So I think you could learn a lot about English society just before the Victorian era from that. And then just recently I just picked this up by accident. Small Worlds by a writer called Caleb Azuma Nelson. And I picked it up because of a sentence. I just read the first sentence. Since the one thing that can solve most of our problems is dancing, it only makes sense that, and then it carries on. And that sentence keeps cropping up. All of our problems can be solved by dancing. It's a Ghanaian writer, but it's about Ghanaian people living in London. And I'm not black and I'm not Ghanaian. It's a society I know nothing about. And this really kind of opens it up in a very, to me, authentic way. Now, I could be completely wrong, of course, but it's got a strong authenticity and integrity about it. I feel this is what it's like to be a young Ghanaian man in London. It's not about drug gangs and violence, and there is racism in it. It does mention that. I don't think you could avoid that. It talks about the police searches and things like that. But basically, what it's about is what it's like living as a young Ghanaian man in our English society and the strength they have from, they got the people gathered together in where are they? Um, anyway, it's Peckham, yeah, that area of London, and the relationships between brothers and sisters and parents and all that is what makes it interesting. And it's a completely different lifestyle to mine. He goes clubbing a lot. There's a lot about music in it. In fact, again, another factual thing he talks about. There's so much about music in it because the main character is trying to be a musician, amongst other things. There's so much about music that I began checking out the people he mentioned. There's somebody called Jay Dilla who did an album called Donuts. I'd never heard of it, never heard of the musician either. But it does exist. And I had to listen to it, and it's really fascinating. And so many more references and so on in that yeah, it's a novel. I dare say it's about the author, but it has the ring of truth for me, at least. I think it's true. I'm convinced. That might be enough, really, to talk about that. But it's what people think about that. I think we divide reading up into fiction and non-fiction, don't we? Sometimes those of us who read, and sometimes fiction is felt to be slightly frivolous. I feel it myself sometimes. Depends on what kind of fiction, of course. Middlemarch, about Titanic, monumental work, but we don't read Middlemarch every day, all day and every day, do we? We might read detective stories. We might read, mysteries. We might read fantasy. What about fantasy? How truthful is that? I suppose. Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones. They do have an integrity to them. Those two do. That's why they're successful because the author has constructed a whole world, and because they've both done it so well, C.R. Martin and Tolkien, that you're convinced by it, you believe in it. It is integrity, and it is true in its own way, by its own definitions. So you could have something could happen in Game of Thrones, and if it was incompatible with the worldview, it would it wouldn't work. It would destroy the illusion. So these writers probably have to work hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. And for science fiction and things like that as well, obviously it's probably even more of a challenge. I've never written those kind of books or anything, but it's an interesting thought to have about that. So there we go. Let's see what you think. Thank you very much. Bye for now.